Hi, my name is Luke Knight, and I'm here in Fort Langley, British Columbia. I'm a part of the team here at Living Waters Church, and I'm going to share with you a little bit around the theme of culture building from our experience here in this community for the past 17 years. A little bit about me. I joined this team and this church about 17 years ago as an intern. I moved into our pastoral team, and I've fulfilled a number of different roles. Currently, I'm an associate pastor. I also serve on our leadership council. We have a blended model of church governance. And so I'm going to share a little bit about how culture building from my experience has happened at Living Waters Church. I want to talk about three things. The first is the value of core values when it comes to culture building. The value of core values when it comes to culture building, and three things connected to that. First, I want to talk about the value of values as guiding principles. Second, talk about the values as embodied example. And third, talk about values as generational batons. So first, the values as guiding principles. Way back when this church was effectively replanted, the leadership at the time determined that a number of core values would be developed to help guide the life of the community. And that was a little bit in contrast to the idea of a particular vision or mission statement. Not that there's anything wrong with those things, but at the time, the discussion was that sometimes a vision or a mission statement can be so particular that it's narrow and constricting, or so broad that it kind of just says everything about what the church might do in the kingdom in a local context. So the idea of core values was established. Can we identify a number of core values that will give us a sense of trajectory and purpose, particular purpose, but also room to explore and grow in this particular community? 7 core values were established, and we carried those for about 13 years or so. And just a couple of years ago, we went through a process of refreshing those values, and we've landed at 5. And just for context, let me share our 5 core values: authenticity, community, generosity, growing, and recognizing and releasing. And if you want to learn more about those, you can visit our website. So we saw value in creating values as guiding principles so that we could explore and express in effectively what was a church plant that had a building. And as I said, we found those to be both particular but also roomy. We ensured, of course, those values were rooted in the truth of Scripture and not misaligned with our denominational leanings and theology. So we're able to say to our congregation, these values don't stand on the same level of Scripture. These values aren't in contrast to our denominational leanings. They, of course, tie in with them, but they're particular to this community. And that started to develop a culture. We had shared language. We talked about it often, and we would routinely throughout the year share on our values and how they are shaping the life of our community. So values as guiding principles. We've committed to those guiding principles and values for the last 15, 17 years. Number 2, values as embodied example. This is when it gets personal and gets powerful for me, because I think that values can be helpful, but if they end up just being words on a page or a poster on a wall or on your website, and they're not deeply embodied by the core leadership of the community, then they do no good. In fact, values that are stated but are not embodied can actually do quite a bit of harm. In my experience as a young minister first coming onto this team, I saw our core values deeply embodied in the life of the people who were shaping this community, a deep commitment to the values. They had come from their heart, and they intended both naturally but also with great discipline to embody those values personally, believing that if our core leadership embodied those values in their lives and in every decision that they were trying to make and ways in which they were trying to serve, that would effectively begin to spill out over the life of the community. It didn't necessarily happen in the first 6 months or first year or 2 years, but I would say that by year 3, in my experience, there was a culture of values that were being consistently embodied by core leadership, and that was beginning to have an effect broadly in the life of the community. It placed a deeply human value on our values. It said to us that being the church and being the people of Jesus is not about ascribing to a bunch of ideas. It's about being a transformed people and asking the question, what kind of peculiar and transformed people is God asking us to be in this specific place and time? We don't have to be any other church than what God is calling us to be. So what does that look like, and how do we embody those values? And I could go on for ages to talk about how our core values were personally embodied by our community. So values are guiding principles, values as embodied example, which is absolutely necessary. And now the third point of values as generational batons. We'll use that kind of picture. A value is a generational baton. Because values were determined to be core and central, and because values were personally embodied, what the values of Living Waters Church have become, at least in my experience, is a kind of generational baton. There has been a connection between what was imagined, what was personally embodied, and what has then been imprinted upon different groups and ages of people. And I would be a product of that. I didn't necessarily plant this church. I was very, very early on in the team. And there were leaders around me, pastors around me, who embodied this example of these values for me and shaped me in that, so that their values and the values of this community have become my values and have shaped my approach to pastoral life and leadership, my approach to my own journey with Jesus. And that baton of a value has been passed on to me. I use that word baton because I think it's a little more objective. I would almost say that for some people in our community, there has been a significant imprinting of values that has come through that personal connection, so that we are just the way that we are. Sometimes when I hear how other communities are operating, I'm just surprised. I just don't even think in the categories of outside of our values. And if they're sound values, biblical values, dignifying values, then hopefully that is a positive thing. And so what having a values as generational batons is doing for us going forward is it allows for us to look back at our history and identify what has worked and what hasn't worked. It also gives us very clear examples that we can look back to and say, look at what happened. Look at what perhaps God had done in partnership with his people that we have to celebrate and potentially can replicate for the future. And so what it creates is a little bit of a circle. If the values are guided principles and they are core, if they are embodied, and then if they become generational batons, then the generation that has kind of ingested them will return back to them as central and core and guiding principles. And it goes around and around and around. So those are some perspectives around the value of values when it comes to culture building. But I hope what you're hearing there is that there's a deeply personal nature to this, in which values can be identified and held to. They have to be personally invested and involved and embodied. And there needs to be also an intention to ensure that the baton of a value is going to move past fleeting or even long-term leadership into the next generation. And that, I think, is how culture in a community can, in some ways, be shaped.